Welcome everyone to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have Chef Evan Marcus-Rotman with us today. He has written a book called Convictions of a Chef. It is a memoir, and help me welcome Chef Evan to Zoom into Books. So Chef Evan, I'd like for you to start out today by telling us the background, and we know the inspiration for your book, and a little bit about yourself. This is quite a story you've got.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I grew up in a broken home in Southern California. My parents were divorced very shortly after I was born. And I lived with my mother until I was about 8, and she was diagnosed with lung cancer and she died. And at that point, I was forced to move in with my father and my stepmother. So I would say that the story begins there as kind of a broken little kid, and got into lots of trouble for a few years. And then I ran away from home, was living on the streets, really could have gone down some bad roads. And then I found psychedelics, and psychedelics made me discover that I didn't enjoy the road I was on. I was becoming a thief, and psychedelics gave me a window into what I was doing, that it just wasn't all right with myself. And so they gave me the impetus to kind of turn that part of my life around. And well, I don't know how much of the book I want to give away here, but then came prison. You know, you start dealing LSD and either you get away with it or you don't. And I didn't get away with it for that long. And prison was a real eye-opener as to how the drug war worked and how it was really destroying lives. It did its best to destroy my life. And I did my best to not let it do that.
Well, tell us about, I'm assuming you started your career as a chef, and then did your problems come later? Or I noticed in your bio you have been a chef on estates, you're on the road with the rock band. You're not quite a baby boomer, but it looks like you got caught in the, as you said, the psychedelics of that era. So tell us a little bit about some of those experiences. What was your first major chef job and how it progressed from there?
Well, I didn't become a chef until after I got out of prison. I started cooking in the prison kitchens. I mean, I cooked a little bit before then, but not professionally, really. I sold gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches at Grateful Dead concerts. When everyone was selling Velveeta cheese and white bread for $1, I was selling buffalo mozzarella with tomato and basil for $2. And so that was, I guess, my real start way back when. But I started cooking in the prison kitchens, and I immediately fell in love with the buzz of the kitchen. And there's an energy when everyone's working together to get the food out hot and on time. And that part was really infectious, but the food was terrible in prison. So my love of food didn't come till later. When I got out of prison, an old friend of mine at a very small little vegetarian restaurant in Berkeley, California, hired me to be a cook. And so I started cooking with him, and I just immediately fell into it. At that time in the mid 90s, this is 95, and I'm not a boomer, by the way, I'm a Gen Xer, pretty straight through and through, born in 69, but I have 3 boomer brothers. So as a kid, my musical tastes were centered around that. And, you know, one of my brothers was kind of a hippie, always he was politically involved against nuclear power. In 6th grade, I had to do a report, and I did mine on No Nukes because I had the No Nukes album. And so I latched on to boomer ideology, I think, at a young age because I looked up to my brothers. And in 95, when I got out of prison, there were 3 great culinary schools in this country. And one was in San Francisco, one was in Charleston, South Carolina, and the other was in Hyde Park, New York, the legendary CIA. Culinary Institute of America. But after spending 3 years in prison, the last thing I wanted to do was go live in a small town in New York and be in a dormitory. So I opted to go to the California Culinary Academy in San Francisco. And it was such an eye-opener into fine dining, into the world of restaurants and how they were run. I don't talk about this much in the book because I ran out of space and I had too many words, but I worked my way around the Bay Area restaurants and I really got a feel for being a line cook and the lifestyle of a cook. And I liked it. It was fun.
That's great. For those of you who had just joined us, we're talking to Chef Evan about his book, Convictions of a Chef. He has overcome adversity, culinary challenges, and health issues. And with all you've been through, what made you want to write the book?
My friends have been telling me I should write a book since I first ran away from home and hitchhiked across country at 16 years old to go on Grateful Dead tour. Since then, I've been told that I should write a book. And I had a kid at a young age and I had a lot of adventures. I've always had an adventurous spirit. I've always been looking for more. So I've been hearing that I should write a book for decades. My standard line was, I want to write a book, but I'm still filling up the chapters. And I still feel like that. I still feel like I have a lot of adventure in my life, and I have a lot more bridges to cross, countries to visit, cuisines to taste. I feel that strongly. But there was a pandemic. We got stuck in the global pandemic and it seemed like a great time to start my book. So knowing nothing about writing a book, I sat down one day on my iPad with this keyboard, this little Bluetooth keyboard right here. And I started writing and I wrote 195,000 words because I didn't know how long a memoir was supposed to be. For those of us that also don't know, for those of you, an average memoir is 60 to 90,000 words. I was informed by the good people at Iguana Books, the publishers that I chose to go with. And so they helped me cut it down. One of my editors in particular, Paula Chiarcos, she was instrumental. She sent me almost an itemized checklist of what the difference between a memoir and a biography and an autobiography, which I actually didn't really know. Turns out I'd started out writing an autobiography. I was born on this date and I'm going to die on, and here it is today. Here I am in a hotel room in Singapore during the pandemic writing this, which is where I did it. But that was the impetus, and the pandemic was really the juice, the time. All of a sudden I had all this free time on my hands, and that's where I got the inspiration.
How did you end up in Singapore during the pandemic?
That is a complicated story and fodder for my next book. But the short version is my wife and I decided to travel the world in 2020. She had retired in 2019, and we painstakingly rented our house for a year. We had a home in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and we rented it for a year to travel the world. Found a renter for a year, which isn't an easy thing to do. Put all of our stuff in a shipping container in front of the house. The renter moved in. We went off traveling, and that date that we left was January 23rd, 2020. So turned out to not be a great year for international travels. And since we couldn't go home because our renter was there, he'd signed a lease, we called him at the beginning of the pandemic, said, hey, how's the pandemic going? And hoping that maybe he didn't want to be in the house anymore. But the house was a beautiful home in the Santa Cruz Mountains, isolated from everybody. There's probably not a better place to shelter, to quarantine, to hang for the pandemic. So we couldn't go home and we couldn't go anywhere else. We were in Bali when the pandemic really started in March of 2020, and our visas were about to expire. And without being able to go home, one of my clients and friends suggested that we go to Singapore because it was close to Bali. It was only a 2-hour flight from where we were. And it was a great place to be for a pandemic. And sure enough, it was. We got there 24 hours before they closed their international borders and their airports, closed the country. And so we got there just before that. We had to agree to do a 2-week quarantine in a quarantine approved hotel, which we did. We found one, and under penalty of caning or $10,000 fine if you leave your hotel room. Location services on your phone, text 3 times a day to make sure you're in place. They don't mess around. So, and we weren't messing around either. So we quarantined for 2 weeks. And then we stayed in a hotel for a few nights while we found an apartment, and we rented a furnished apartment for the rest of our stay there, which was the length of our visa. And we tried to stay longer. We tried to get our visas extended, but we were denied. And then we even appealed our denial with a local government official sponsoring our appeal, a friend of this client of mine. And even with his sponsorship, we were denied our appeal because it was 2020. They did not want visitors there. And so we were forced to leave Singapore, and with nowhere left in the world to go because it was the pandemic and still unable to go home, we came to Maui, and we quarantined again here in Maui, Hawaii. And that's where I'm sitting right now talking to you.
That's amazing. And I would have to think one of the most frightening experiences to be caught in the midst of the pandemic like that. Have you been affected by the fires?
Us personally, no. Our home is in South Maui, and the fires were on the west side. And we were actually on the mainland, and we were in California when the fires took place. We've been home for just about 2 weeks, and since then, we've both been volunteering. I volunteered for a few days with the World Central Kitchen, which is something I've always wanted to do. And my wife has been volunteering with local organizations as well. So we've been trying to help out as we can.
What's the World Central Kitchen?
World Central Kitchen was founded by a super chef, Jose Andres. It's an international organization that was founded with a tragedy in Haiti, I'm going to say maybe 6 years ago. Jose went there. He's a Michelin-starred chef from Spain, and he went and set up a giant kitchen and got local chefs to volunteer and got local people to donate food. And now it's a huge disaster relief organization, and they go all over the world. They were in Poland cooking for Ukraine. They cooked during the California fires. They're headed to Florida now to cook for hurricane relief. And it's a giant nonprofit now that does disaster relief. Really wonderful organization. I would encourage everybody listening to look into them and donate if you can, or become involved, volunteer.
That's a wonderful thing for people to be doing. How has your book been received? I know you said it's been out since August. Tell us how things are going right now for you, and are you doing book signings at the moment?
I don't have any book signings planned as of yet, but it's something I want to do. My book has been really well received. I am blessed with a really large community of friends and to a lesser extent family, but I have a ton of friends all over the world from my travels, from my yachting career, just from being me. And so at last count, I had sold about 130 copies on Amazon, and I'm unable to track Audible and Kindle, but I've sold a reasonable amount of copies. I have a dozen good reviews on Amazon, great reviews, 5-star reviews, mostly from people I know, and surprisingly, for a couple from people I don't know, which is the exciting part for me. I'm working with a marketing group called Author Connections on the East Coast, which is how I found you and why I'm sitting here today. And they have done a great job at getting my book out there. And I've gotten 4 now reviews from professional book reviewers, and all of them raving. Actually, the one I got this morning from Literary Titans was 5 out of 5 stars, very flattering. And so I'm feeling confident.
Well, that's great, and that's excellent for only just a few weeks out. I'd say you're definitely on the right track. Can you tell us what ended up? The title of your book is Convictions of a Chef. So can you tell us about the convictions part? How did that come about, and how did that change your life?
Sure. I was selling LSD as a young man on Grateful Dead tour, and I had a son at a young age. I had a son 2 months. My son was born 2 months before my 18th birthday to the day. So I had pretty much stopped selling LSD, with the exception of to a couple of friends. And one of those friends got busted, and when she was faced with a very long prison sentence, she decided to give me up. And so I got arrested, was indicted, very scary, never really been arrested before. And my first time I was facing a very long prison sentence of 12 and a half to 15 years due to some incongruities in the sentencing structure around LSD. And I went to trial. They didn't offer me any deals that were worth it. And so I went to trial, a jury trial, which is very scary under any circumstances. But when you're 23, really something to do that. As I think back upon that, it's one of the most kind of mind-blowing things is the jury selection, the U.S. Marshals escorting me in and out. They let me wear a suit and tie, and putting on this weird suit that didn't fit that well for the trial. The whole thing was very strange. And then some circumstances around the law that I was sentenced under changed. And around my actual case, there were some changes in the structure of my actual case that happened. Excuse me. And my sentence was shortened, so I didn't quite have to do all that time.
Well, I'm glad of that. Have the laws changed a lot? What year was that when you were arrested?
I was arrested in June of 92 and released in February of 95. So I was in for just shy of 3 years. The law that I was sentenced under, the actual law that I was sentenced under, has changed. And some of the drug laws are beginning to soften. Since I've been out, I helped collect signatures to get medical cannabis on the ballot in California. I personally collected over 10,000 signatures to get Prop 215 on the ballot, and that opened the door for medical cannabis. Medical cannabis is now legal in 26 states. Recreational cannabis is legal in, I think, 7 or 8 states. Several cities have decriminalized psychedelics. Denver, Portland, Oakland, Santa Cruz, I know, have all decriminalized psychedelics. And you don't have to look far anymore to find psychedelics in the news. You go on Netflix, there's the Michael Pollan special, How to Change Your Mind. He wrote a groundbreaking book on the power of psychedelics. And Paul Stamets and Fantastic Fungi is very popular, and mycelium and how mushrooms are changing the world. I cooked in the Silicon Valley for about 10 years, and all the computer geeks are microdosing now for a long time and finding that it gets them, creativity. Psychedelic therapy is something that I've seen talked about on CNN, Fox News, NPR. I mean, you don't have to look far to see that psychedelics are now being accepted within our community more and more. And so I'm hoping that the drug war is going to crumble. Our prisons, we've learned we're at an interesting time right now, because in the 90s, 80s and 90s, we warehoused people. I was one of them. We just filled our prisons up. Our prison population it doubled in that time period. From 1980, it was at about 1 million. And when I got busted in 1992, it was over 2 million. So it doubled in that time. And so we've learned that warehousing people is not the answer to the drug war. And then I've lived in San Francisco for many years, and right now we have people doing drugs on the street openly everywhere. And that's not working out either. People are just shooting up in public and defecating on the streets, and not just in San Francisco. I love that city, but many cities. But we're learning that warehousing people doesn't work, and doing absolutely nothing doesn't work either. So I'm hoping that as a society, we can find some more progressive solutions to deal with addiction in our country and with the drug war in general.
That's so true. And what do you think about the political landscape? I think things have changed so much around the drug war today. You touched on that a little bit with all the drugs that are coming across the border. Have you seen that problem where you are?
Uh, I mean, obviously, there's a problem with drugs coming across the border, but I think the real problem is the way that we look at drugs as a society. You know, I think that prohibition has never worked since the beginning of time. Anytime we've tried to prohibit, it just doesn't work. People are going to do what they want to do. And so I think if you take the crime out of drugs and the profit out of drugs, but create safe spaces for people to do drugs, I think that is personally the right path, or a path to explore. At least I think that we need to embrace the principles of harm reduction. Harm reduction is the idea that people are going to do what they're going to do no matter what, and so we should provide a safe way. And if this involves needle exchange or giving condoms out in high school so dumb kids like me don't knock up their girlfriends, or creating safe spaces for drug use, I think these are steps in the right direction. But to keep penalizing people has been problematic and expensive, and then to do nothing is problematic and expensive. So I really feel like we need to find a more progressive approach.
I think many people would agree with that and are trying to work on that. You've had many interesting chef positions. Tell us about the most harrowing chef job you've ever had.
Harrowing. Well, I mean, some of those stories are in my book. I guess I'll touch on them briefly. You know, as I said, I was a huge fan and follower of the Grateful Dead. And in 2004, I got hired to be the chef for the remaining members of that band, which at the time were touring as The Dead. And that job ended up being a nightmare. I left that job fired, in tears, broken, my ego destroyed. They really ran me through the ringer, and it messed me up for a long time. Took me a little while to build my confidence back after that. So that was harrowing. Just being a freelance chef on yachts, you know, a freelancer comes in when the other chef broke his leg, got arrested, had to go home to see grandma's funeral or whatever. So I did a lot of freelance work, and at times that was problematic because sometimes the chefs left because the owners were terrible, or the captain was a jerk, or they left in a bad state and the galley was a mess. And so you really had to come in and clean up after them really quickly and pick up the pieces so that the owners or the next charter guests wouldn't know. They would just know that they had this amazing food coming at them every time they got a little hungry.
I cannot imagine the experience you have had. I would encourage everybody to pick up a copy of Convictions of a Chef. I know these stories are going to be entertaining and harrowing at the same time. What was one of your most favorite? And you can just give us the Reader's Digest version because we don't want to spoil the book for people. What was your favorite chef position?
One of my favorite chef positions was the time I was asked to cook on a small island in Fiji. And now I've cooked on a couple private islands, and usually two to be exact. And one of them was very exclusive, you know, an old farmhouse, but millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars to rent this island for a week so that you could have a chef cook for you, and the Bahamian guys get the jet skis or the fishing gear out or all that. That was very exclusive. The island in Fiji that I cooked on was literally a deserted island. There was nobody on it except for us guys, the guys that were building the house, me cooking for them, and a small handful of Fijians that they had hired from local neighboring islands for the labor. So we got there with no electricity, so I could have no proteins or anything like that, and I could only bring grains and things to cook with, but not actually things to cook, you know. So I went there really on a wing and a prayer, hoping that we were going to get fish or wild game or whatever. And I won't spoil the book, but nobody starved.
I can't even imagine living a life like that. How did you get that job?
Burning Man. I was an attendee of the Burning Man Festival for many years. I ran a kitchen out there for a camp called the Playa-Q. I was just telling my wife yesterday, these days, every camp out there has a good kitchen, often a professional chef. But back in the early 2000s, when it was a bit more rogue, there wasn't a lot of big kitchens out there. And what was different about my camp is that for a lot of camps, they have big kitchens, but it's just to make food for them to survive on. For us, we did the food as our art projects. And I'll let you read about those in the book, or you already have. But we were doing food as art, not just food for survival. And that's what made our camp different. And it was the skills I learned out there, which really were a culmination of all of my cooking skills, cooking in different places. When I cooked on the road with the rock bands, it was always a different kitchen every day in a different place. We'd build our kitchen, but sometimes we'd have running water. Sometimes it'd be behind the stage, it'd be really loud. Sometimes it'd be out by the dumpsters. It was always somewhere different. And so that taught me an adaptability for just creating a very small nuclear world that you live in, this little small space. Well, there's my mixers, there's my bowls, there's my knives, here's my stove. And it gave me the ability to tune out the minutia around me and just focus on the task at hand, which was just getting the food out. And so I think that really helped me.
That's amazing. We have a question, excuse me, from a viewer. The question is, will you ever do something like a yacht or a chartered trip where everyone can go on and experience your food and stories?
It's a great idea.
What a great idea.
Yeah, I'm in. Sign me up. Where?
Be sure and work on that.
Yeah, I love this idea. The answer is
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, would you like to read an excerpt from your book for us?
Sure. Here's my book for those that haven't seen it. All right. Chapter 1, Busted. My roommate and I are sound asleep when we hear banging on the door. It's a noise so loud and aggressive that it can only be cops. I stumble out to the main room and twist the lock on the door. Before it clicks open, it is thrown open, and within seconds I am surrounded by screaming men breaking through the front door and the kitchen door at the same time. Before I can speak, I am face down on the ground, a knee in my back and the cold steel of a gun against the back of my head. With my cheek pressing into the carpet, I'm reminded that it hasn't been cleaned in years. All I can think is, they're going to wake Cassidy. He's down the hall in his race car bed, dreaming about whatever it is that 5-year-old boys dream of. When I try to turn my head, the cop jams his gun into the back of my neck. There's a yelling, but I can't focus on the words. I just see more and more of them coming in with guns raised, scrambling in like cockroaches when a light goes on. They're screaming about weapons. Are there any weapons? Are there weapons? Are there any guns? I hear my voice choked and high, saying, "We have no guns." At that moment, one of the cops emerges from my bedroom, holding up a shotgun case. They start screaming more questions. The cop holding me down wrenches my arm harder behind my back and jams the gun into the base of my skull. My shoulders feel like they're going to pop out of the sockets. "Open it," I say through gritted teeth. The pain in my shoulders is brutal. I hear the zipper of the nylon case being opened, and the case falls to the floor with a swoosh. Even with my head crammed into the carpet, I know what they're looking at. It's a 4-foot purple plastic graphics bong with a 6-shooter bowl on it. There's a short silence, and they all start laughing. The gun in my neck eases up a bit, and I can feel the temperature in the room come down by a few degrees. My pressures seem almost relaxed, but that doesn't help me. I'm 23 and terrified. I can feel the wet heat in my eyes, and I rub my tears into the smelly carpet, hoping that nobody has seen them. That's page 1.5. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I said that's excellent writing, by the way.
Thank you.
For sure. We have another question. How has your travel experience affected your cooking styles?
Well, everywhere you go, there's different ingredients, different people, different methods of cooking. The first time I got to Thailand, I was surprised to see food so readily available on every street corner and often sold in small portions. And when I was there, it was very hot. It's hot a lot of the time there. And so I found a lot of people eat 5 small meals a day instead of 3 meals a day, which we as Americans are sort of accustomed to. In Thailand, everything's small. And so you can just get a little snack, or it's not uncommon to have a little bowl of noodles while you're waiting for the bus. And then an hour later, have some sliced fruit that you got from a vendor. And so people's eating styles, like eating smaller portions more often, was a real eye opener for me. And obviously the ingredients, I've taken cooking classes at anywhere I could in different countries where they have them. But I say this a lot through the book. I've always found the best way to learn about cooking when you're new places is to steal with your eyes. You always watch the cooks, what they're doing at the street stalls, in the restaurants. You see how they set up their stations. I found it fascinating in India that a meal often starts with a run down to the market. You know, if I order the fried fish, sometimes I'll see the 12-year-old kid run down the street and come back with a gallon of oil. Oh, okay, they didn't have any oil today until this sale was made. And so that's part of stealing with your eyes, I think.
It's got to be everywhere you go. I'm sure you learn more, and it's nice to be able to take ideas from actually cooking. What are the goals that you have for your book? One that comes to mind for me would be speaking engagements. Do you do speaking engagements?
Chef Evan is available for all speaking engagements, all assignments on a yacht to cook food and tell stories. Chef Evan is open. And he doesn't usually talk about himself in the third person.
I think that's great. I think you have a powerful message for everyone. I would like to think maybe that high school kids and college kids would be one of your target markets for sure. Trying to have an exciting career without going to prison. That would be a good goal.
If I could give that advice to anyone, don't go to prison. It really sucked.
Right. So your experiences, I think, can definitely help others. I know you have a website, and I have been posting the links in the Facebook comments. So if people want to get in touch with you, is the best way through your website?
Yes. Yes, it is. ChefEvanPresents.com. That's been my business name for many years, and that is the best way to reach me.
That's great. So what are you currently doing now besides writing? Are you chefing somewhere?
We just got back to Maui. So we've lived on Maui for a short time now, just about 3 years. And I'm trying to get my business going here. I just got a business license and my liability insurance here on Maui. And then the fires happened. And so it's kind of an awkward time. But as I say, we live on the south side of Maui, and Maui is really hungry for tourism right now. There was mixed messages coming out right after the fires that said, don't come to Maui. And we are barely getting over COVID here, the pandemic and what that did to our economy. And so I would encourage everyone to come to South Maui or the North Shore and visit the restaurants. Or if you don't want to go to a restaurant, hire a private chef, and he'll come in with lots of good stories for you and hopefully better food. I'm marketing dinner parties for 10 to 15 people or up to 15 people, which has sort of been my sweet spot, honing my skills on yachts. We usually had 10 guests and 10 crew. So my job was to feed the 10 crew dinner at 6 o'clock and the 10 guest dinner at 8 o'clock, and then breakfast and lunch and snacks and breads and desserts and all the things. It was very hard, but my point in this is that my sweet spot is smaller dinner parties, and I really enjoy that. And so I'm hoping to tap into that market.
I would think there would be an excellent market for your services. Definitely. We have another question. They want to know, what food do you like cooking most?
People ask me that a lot,
Or what's your favorite recipe?
I have to say that I'm not a recipe driven chef. I'm an ingredient driven chef, and predominantly ingredients. And so just yesterday we went up to a new little produce store up country. And they had all organic stuff. I got some nice mustard greens, and I got some of these beautiful mangoes right here. And so I'm thinking about what I can do with them later. I've always liked, okay, so gumbo is one of my favorite dishes to make. And I don't have a recipe that I use. I have a technique that I used when I interned in New Orleans. It's stock and a roux and the way you add it all together. There's a whole process. It's a very complex dish with lots of layers of flavor. So that for me is a fun dish to make. But what I really enjoy doing the most is going to the farmer's market and seeing what looks delicious, opening my fridge. We're part of the Maui Food Hub here, which is a nonprofit that they gather information from all the different farms around Maui. And so then on their website, they list it, and I can go into it and look and say, oh, Farms has their apple bananas, but Hue'e Farms has these mangoes, and I can pick and choose from different farms, and then at the end of the week, I go and I pick up a box, and it's got all my stuff. It keeps me It keeps me from having to drive to the farmer's market, which is a 35-minute drive. Although I enjoy walking around the farmer's market very much, the Maui Food Hub has been very convenient. So I'm really an ingredient-driven chef, is the answer to that question. Long-winded.
Well, I think that's very smart and very helpful too. Another question we've had is, have you ever thought about hosting cooking classes in Maui?
I haven't thought about it that much in Maui, but I have given some cooking lessons over the years. About 6 or 7 years ago, when we were in the Silicon Valley, I had a family reach out to me, and they were training their daughter. Their daughter was really into food, and she wanted to be on Junior Master Chef, the TV show. So I gave her a series of cooking lessons, and wonderful family. She made it all the way to the finals of the tryouts, but didn't quite make it on the show. But shortly after those lessons, the family asked me to do an Iron Chef themed birthday party for her. It was her 10th birthday. And so I bought all these ingredients, set up a pantry, and I sort of steered them in the direction of what dishes to make. But there was 3 groups of 3 girls, and I coached them, and grandmothers were the judges, and that was really fun. And just recently, this family, same family, they have 2 sons that are teenagers now, and they wanted to learn how to grill. So the family hired me to come, and I bought a bunch of different ingredients, and I taught them how to grill 6 different items that were very different, from a piece of salmon to quick sear to a whole chicken, which is an indirect heat, hour and a half. And so I taught them as many cooking methods as I could, and it was really, really fun. Everyone had a great time. And the next day, those 2 boys went to the grocery store, bought the exact ingredients that I bought, and cooked every dish that I did, that I taught them, with their family. And they sent me a really nice email and thank you. So I would love to give more cooking lessons. I enjoy teaching, and I love to talk about food. And so yeah, a farmer's market tour and cooking lesson would be something that
Great.
I like.
Have you ever been in a cooking competition?
When I was on yachts, they did a lot at the boat shows. They did a couple competitions, but they were usually just for one dish. It's not like the TV style competitions where you're cooking against everybody. But a claim to fame that I have is I won a conch fritter competition in the Bahamas. I beat out several Bahamians. It was quite the upset. And I came in 2nd place in another yacht competition up in New England. I made a clam chowder. It was a chowder competition, and I came in 2nd.
Congratulations. I think that's super. That's great. We had another comment about the World Central Kitchen. Are they active in Maui due to the fires now, or do you know?
They were active in Maui, which is where I volunteered for 3 days. They tend to stay. It seems like they stay for about 3 weeks to a month, which is what they did here. I don't know if they do that everywhere. They've since pulled their big kitchen out of here because Maui is, I don't know. They pulled their big kitchen out for more relief elsewhere. Is probably the best answer. They're in Florida now doing hurricane relief. But they've left some chefs here, and they're still supporting local restaurants and food trucks. And so what they're doing is they're giving these organizations, these companies, or the food trucks and restaurants, food that they can prepare and then get out to the community. So they're still here, but on a smaller scale, and I would love to volunteer with them. I sort of jokingly or off the cuff, I like to say I was just waiting for the right catastrophe to come close enough. That's a terrible thing to say. It's just a bad joke, but I was.
We understand what you're saying. Yes, absolutely. Well, Chef Evan, we are almost out of time. We've had a lot of good questions, and I would urge everyone to pick this book up. I'm sure you can get it on your website or on Amazon, and I've posted all those links in the Facebook comments. This video will be available on the Zoom Into Books Facebook page. You can watch it anytime. And in 2 to 3 weeks, it will also be released on the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. And Chef Evan, do you have a YouTube channel?
I do not. Something to look forward to in the future.
I think you should think about it and do some cooking videos. I think you would be very popular. And I feel a cookbook in your future. So thank you so much. Thank you to Author Connections for bringing Chef Evan to Zoom Into Books. And when your next book comes out, please contact Zoom Into Books. We'd love to have you back anytime.
I will. Can I say just one more quick thing? I had in my that I never got to, and that is one goal that I have for the book is I'd like to remove the stigmas around recreational drug users, because lots of people use drugs recreationally and don't go to prison or don't end up sleeping on the streets. There's tons of people that have used drugs for decades on a recreational basis, myself included. And so I'd like to remove the stigma around that, and I hope that my book brings awareness to that, and as well as removing the stigma around ex-cons, because a lot of people I tell I've been to prison and they just can't believe it because I seem to be, I don't know, normal or whatever. But I'd like to remove the stigma around that. And then finally, around people with psoriasis. There's a huge stigma around people with psoriasis, which my medication has under control right now. But at one point, my body was covered in up to 85% around just dead skin. And so there's these stigmas that I hope that my book helps to alleviate or to relieve.
That's so true. You're very inspirational, and there's so many people that suffer from both of those issues, unfortunately. So I think you've done a real service writing this book. I think it will help a lot of people, and everybody on Facebook is sending you love and are very excited about your book.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Really honored, and I'm grateful to be here. And thanks for the good work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll be back again soon.
Aloha.